The characters of Regular Show have become a few of the most popular icons in Cartoon Network's history. Despite being a kids' TV series, there are 7 characters in this show that distinctly represent the 7 deadly sins, and we will be talking about all of them. But before I begin, I must state that while rewatching the show and doing research on this video, I found some guy on Reddit 3 years ago who wrote a post about the same topic, a lot of which I will be expanding upon with my own points. So I urge you to all check his post as well. That being said, let's start off with the most obvious sin: lust. Lust is defined as an intense and disordered desire for sexual pleasure. Being a kids show, of course, this can't be shown. However, out of all the characters, no one exemplifies this trait better than Mordecai. The sin of lust stems from his ongoing romantic interest and endeavours throughout the show, more specifically with Margaret. Although nothing is wrong with having crushes, Mordecai's desperate pursuit of romance often leads him to prioritise responsibilities and friendships, showcasing a form of lust through the need for romantic fulfillment. Mordecai would go to great lengths to achieve his desires, such as lying about being a part of a band and knowing how to play an instrument just to impress his romantic interest, sometimes trying to prove himself so much it comes at the expense of others. Much like the time he quite literally kills Rigby because he didn't get the chance to go to the movies with Margaret. Although many could say this is closer to envy, we can see how Mordecai's romantic desire often leads him to slack off, or sometimes even work harder, or as long as he gets what he wants in the end. Like the time he works overtime to afford tickets to see Margaret at Fist Pump. Besides romantic fulfillment, Mordecai's tendency to become infatuated with superficial qualities such as looks and his ignorance of other potential partners highlights his shallow understanding of love and vulnerability to lustful impulses. Although Mordecai morbidly accepts his sin as a character flaw, the next candidate more often refuses to accept any of his own, representing the sin of pride. Pride is thought of as an excessive and selfish love of one's own excellence. As controversial as it may seem, Skips is the character that personifies this trait the most. Despite being one of the wisest and smartest characters in the park, the sin of pride is demonstrated through his overconfidence in his abilities and his reluctance to ask for help or admit when he's wrong. His immortality and centuries of experience often lead him to be dismissive of others' perspectives. Although he has displayed feats of wisdom and knowledge numerous times, his pride is showcased through his occasional selfishness and arrogance. Skips would refuse to ask for help even if he didn't understand something, such as when Mordecai and Rigby needed help with a computer virus. Trying to prove his excellence, Skips instead revealed his selfish nature, being shown to be visibly upset when Tecmo is called to help instead. This arrogance has been shown to prioritize himself over others, as he becomes obsessed with Rigby after being beaten by him in an arm wrestling competition. So obsessed with his self-image and not losing, it comes to the point where Skips ends up killing Rigby to prove himself. This pride isn't just shown through his arrogance, but his reluctance to share details of his past demonstrates his pride in maintaining an aura of mystery and strength, even if it may be at the cost of his friends. His tendency to downplay his emotions and maintain a stoic facade even when faced with extreme stress further shows his pride in maintaining this image of invulnerability. Despite all of this, Skips has been shown to set his pride down for the greater good of those around him, which is hard to say for the next candidate, who neglects his health and sometimes safety, representing the sin of gluttony. Gluttony is typically defined as the excess in eating and drinking beyond reason. Food is such a prevalent part in many episodes, but much like the sin of lust, only one character comes to mind with this sin, that being Muscle Man. Muscle Man's portrayal of gluttony is quite evident, being demonstrated through his consumption of food and sometimes through his overindulgence in crude humour. This insatiable appetite for food usually comes at the expense of himself. Muscle Man is personally one of my favourite characters, but just look at this.
For me, bro.
Much of Muscle Man's character revolves around food. He can be seen many times throughout the show binge eating as much as he can, regularly joining eating contests, and even when he thought he won the lottery, he used a large majority of the money on wings. I love food as much as the next person, but Muscle Man has been shown to ignore his safety for food on many occasions, such as getting teleported to a different reality because he ate too many donuts, or even the times when he almost chokes himself out after stuffing his mouth. Disregarding his enjoyment of pranks, many would say Muscle Man's gluttonous tendencies derive purely from self-enjoyment. The only person he is really affecting is himself. In contrast to our next character, who unlike Muscle Man, prioritizes his own personal interest over others, this candidate representing the sin of greed. Greed is defined as the immoderate love or excessive desire for wealth and material possessions. Despite not appearing as much as the other characters mentioned in this video, Mr. Millard is regular show's physical embodiment of excessive wealth. In the times he does appear, he is always represented through a lens of wealth, power, and control, more specifically through how he prioritizes his profits and interests over the well-being of others, including his employees. His greed can be represented through his stinginess and his exploitation of others. Although it's not too obvious, his refusal to invest in necessary repairs and improvements to the park illustrates his neglect towards his staff well-being. His relentless pursuit of power and profits usually comes at the expense of others, lacking empathy towards Benson when Mordecai and Rigby destroyed a car, or even when he sent his workers into space, all of which highlight Mr. Millard's selfishness and his willingness to exploit his employees for his own financial benefit. Although he does show a soft side towards his son Pops, Mr. Millard has demonstrated several times to misuse his wealth, such as when he trapped his workers in a dome purely for entertainment. However, this act of selfishness isn't just present in Mr. Millard's constant desire for wealth, but also in our next candidate, representing the sin of envy. Envy is thought of as resentment and often an insatiable desire for another's good fortune or excellence. Even when the first season was released, it was quite evident that one character stood out representing this sin, that being Rigby. Unfortunately, Rigby is often seen as a shadow of others, often being compared to the park members either by physicality or status. As a result of this, Rigby can be seen as jealous of others' recognition and success, personifying the sin of envy. Although it's kind of tragic in a way, Rigby being overshadowed usually leads him to either feeling inadequate or sometimes even resentful of others. When his brother Don arrives at the park, he becomes very popular amongst the other workers, and to add insult to injury, he is shown to be both physically and financially superior to Rigby. Despite Don treating him with love, Rigby instead retaliates with harsh comments and despise. His sin of envy can be seen many times towards his friends, sabotaging Mordecai's college application when his one was unsuccessful, or even going to great lengths such as learning a new martial arts style just so that he can beat Mordecai in punchies. Much like the other sins covered, Rigby has been shown to have no remorse for others. Swapping Benson's fortune cookie for his own, he is willing to do anything for his own good, even if it may be at the cost of others' misfortune. However, a problem that Rigby faces is how his issues are usually downplayed by everyone else, so his envious tendencies usually go unnoticed by those around him. This cannot be said for our next candidate, who isn't afraid to openly display his deadly sin, representing the sin of wrath. Wrath is defined as strong and uncontrolled feelings of anger, rage, and even hatred. Understanding this definition, anyone who's ever watched a regular show episode knows that only one character comes to mind: the park's manager, Benson. His portrayal of Wrath is presented through his frequent outbursts of anger and frustration, especially towards the antics of Mordecai and Rigby. His short temper and tendency to lose control under stress or pressure align with the sin of Wrath. I really like Benson. I believe his reactions are sometimes justified and generally misunderstood. However, his uncontrolled feelings and fits of rage are usually unwarranted and sometimes even dangerous to those around him. Like the time he almost destroys the park and almost kills Mordecai and Rigby when he released all his pent-up rage. He's often been shown to let his emotions control his actions, usually taking out his anger and destroying things without reason. Or irrationally making decisions that lead to much more dire consequences, as seen when he hired Peeps. As shown in the episode Think Positive, we see it's in Benson's nature to be angry. Many could argue he needs to release his anger and frustration, but his strict adherence to rules and regulations and his intolerance for mistakes highlights his perfectionist tendencies and his struggle to emotionally cope with uncertainty and chaos, which, unlike our next and final candidate, avoids any or all responsibilities, representing the sin of sloth. The word lazy comes to mind when hearing this, but sloth is described as the culpable lack or avoidance of physical or spiritual effort. Hearing this, many would quickly turn to the main characters of Mordecai and Rigby due to their work ethic, but I have reason to believe that one character stands out for the sin of sloth, the one and only Pops. This is very controversial as he is one of the most pure-hearted characters and definitely by no means lazy. However, his portrayal of sloth stems from his naivety and tendency to avoid conflict or responsibility, always seeming to live in his own world. His carefree and leisurely lifestyle causes Pops to rely on others to handle his difficult situations. As a result of this, Pop's avoidance of responsibility unintentionally leads to misunderstandings and problems, depending on others to get him out of trouble when he was trapped in a sugar rush dimension, when he was trapped in a dizzy dimension, or when he was trapped in a virtual reality dimension. In some of these cases, you can say Mordecai and Rigby are to blame. However, he can be seen multiple times prioritizing leisurely activities over his responsibilities, sometimes even neglecting them entirely, such as when he was tasked to give a speech. His sloth can also be defined for his avoidance of confrontation, either watching his friends fight on the sideline or avoiding it entirely. Pop's tendency to rely on others to solve his problems and make decisions for him demonstrates his dependency and his desire to avoid taking responsibility for his own life. Although this isn't a bad thing, it is a commonly occurring theme that fits with this sin. One thing I really enjoy about regular show is how layered and established each character is. Although they have their flaws, they have been seen to either redeem or change throughout the events of the show. In the end, I don't believe these characters are special if it weren't for these moments. In my perspective, these flaws aren't just defined as deadly sins, but as development in their character.